Greetings, beloved. We welcome you today on this Wednesday, May 6th, for noonday Bible study, coming from the First Missionary Baptist Church of Huntsville, Alabama. We greet our disciple members as well as our friends and other special guests who are tuning in today. We are streaming live from our website, from Facebook as well as YouTube. So we will continue or at least begin the teaching component of the Lamentation series that I began on Sunday in the first sermon. And for the month of May, we will walk through the chapters in the book of Lamentations as a way of ministering to our needs emotionally and psychologically during these days. So please share the session with your friends, host watch parties so that others too can join in and be blessed by the teaching. Let's pray together. Gracious God, we give you thanks and praise for what we have received in the gift of this day. We are grateful for life in the midst of it fleeting elsewhere around this nation and the world. We thank you for that which we have, and we know that it is gifts that come from you. Those are gifts from you. And so we ask your blessing upon us in our time of conversation and sharing through your word, that you would open it and make the book talk, so that we might be blessed and be given some sense of comfort and peace for the living of these days and the facing of this hour. Through Jesus Christ the Lord, we pray. Amen. All right. So our theme and subject for these days is doing communal grief work. Ancient lamentations for modern times, and the various slides will come on the screen so that you can see them and be guided along with us in our conversation. But the book of Lamentations, I want to give us a way of framing our conversation and appreciating what it offers to us. First is this quote, this wisdom that comes to us from the womanist tradition. So womanism is this black female God talk, ways that women, black women, embrace their identity as children of God, as daughters of God, and share out of their experiences, both lived and curated experiences, the truth of God based upon their experience. And one of the pioneering leaders of womanism in America is the late Katie Cannon, who is remembered for this particular quote. And Katie Cannon says simply that we ought to do the work that our souls must have, that each of us must do the work that our soul must have. This is important because we may think of grief as something that simply overwhelms and will just naturally go away and not bother us, not bring issues before us. But grief is essentially work that we must do. It's emotional work that you and I must engage in order to keep our souls healthy, to purge, and to keep pace with the rhythm of life as things come. And so Cannon was a proponent that there is some soul work that is assigned to each of us based upon our experiences. and that the work of your soul may not necessarily be the work of someone else's soul in that given moment, but that's why each of us must be in tune with our own soul, our own being, our own sense of wholeness in order to do what we need. It's not about being selfish, it's about self-care, right? Caring for oneself in such a way that you remain emotionally, spiritually, psychologically whole in order to engage life's issues as they come and are thrust upon you. That when you fail to do the work that your soul needs, you'll not be ready to handle what life can throw at you. And it will ultimately show in your responses to the experiences and how they affect you and how you respond to those particular issues. So if we go to the book of Lamentations in our conversation today, we'll discover that it's a collection of 5 laments, 5 individual laments across 5 chapters, each chapter a different lament that bewails the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians around 587, 586 BCE. That's what it is. It's this collection of wailings that take into account what has happened to the people of Judah, having been invaded and many being deported, people being killed, temple being destroyed, and all of those issues that would face a people who have been broken and decimated by some foreign incursion that leaves them different from what life was like before the incursion occurred. So these collection of laments are essentially samplings of liturgies that were recited when the people remembered that historical event. So it wasn't a figment of their imagination. It was an actual historical event that they remembered through liturgies, songs, through some kind of performed recollection that reminded them of what the experience was, the depth of the pain, the struggle, the burden, right? The anguish that they experienced, all brought to bear in these liturgies that have been collected in order to form the corpus of the book that we call Lamentations. And per the authorship, many have attributed the authorship of Lamentations to the prophet Jeremiah, and there are some similarities to some texts in the book of Jeremiah, but then there are also similarities to other books in the wisdom tradition, particularly books of the Psalms that lift some grief, some pain, some agony to God, and even some of the literature of the prophets, and of course the book of Job that bewails and bemoans the experiences, the excruciating emotional toll that is really wrought upon Job, and how he has to contend with the issues of life. Right? These things come to bear and are put on display in the book of Lamentations that seem to have come from both priestly leaders and lay people who are all lending their voices in some chorus, some chorus and some cry on behalf of their city in light of what has taken place. And so just as you and I would have remembrances of some event of the past that has brought pain. They have put together their lamentations, and somehow they've been curated and collected so that they could be preserved so that you and I can share in the experience. Now, what's fascinating about Scripture is how timeless the truth of Scripture really is to us, how it goes from age to age and season to season, and from epoch to epoch and generation to generation, that we can draw some hope and some strength, some resource from the richness that the text offers us, and can be blessed by it for what it means for our lives. And in these days that are ours, and all that we go through, Lamentations does offer us something helpful, if only to help us articulate what our souls need to articulate, and what we are not hearing in the public commentary, whether from media personalities or representatives of governmental institutions. We can at least do the work of our soul from the book that we are going to study this month, the book of Lamentations. So we go also to the slide again. The common motif in this book, that's common in the Psalms, that's common in Job, that's common in the prophets, is grief. Grief, pain, and pain that's compressed, pain that's performed, pain that's echoed, pain that's shouted, pain that's just gushing forth with intense force, so that the soul could say what it really needs to say, what it feels, and articulate for people what is just deep down in them. And that's what courses through each chapter of this book. That's what is held in common with the lament psalms. Also what's held in common with the book of Job and his chronicles, what's held in common with many of the prophets of the Old Testament who are speaking on behalf of God about the pain, the agony that people feel at various points of life based upon historical circumstances. And what I want to lay forth for us is that lament ought to be some part of the experience, because not all of our experiences are pleasant, right? Not all of our experiences are full of jubilation or full of ecstasy or full of enthusiasm. Some of our experiences are painful, are agonizing. And we have to learn how to cultivate the language to express what we feel, right? Too often, our replies to people's questions about how we're doing is rote and mechanical. Fine. I'm good. I'm okay. And it's the case because we live under the expectation that we should always be good. We've been convinced that it's somehow weak it's weak if we express that we're not good in a situation. It's weak if we fail to project something positive or something that's always optimistic. If we ever were to let our guard down and be honest and truthful about exactly how we feel, some days we'll have to tell the truth. Hey, I'm kind of not feeling it today. You know, something of life is happening, and we are trained. We've been trained culturally to respond in ways that if someone suggests or intimates that they're not good, that our next move is to try to respond, to cheer up, or to either dismiss it in such a way that suggests, be positive, look at the bright side, look at the glass as being half full, rather than the glass as being half empty. When in some moments, in some instances, people do need our solidarity with them when they express to us what they're going through. So I want you to think about that and write that down, that if ever someone is courageous enough to tell you how he or she feels on a day that's not necessarily their best day, respond with some empathy and some compassion, right? Don't just gloss over what they raised to you. Acknowledge what they said, take note of it, and in a real way, ask them, how may you help? How may you respond? Right? Yeah. So the channeling of emotions in the book of Lamentations is its appeal and has great drawing power. Because just like going shopping for a card for some special occasion, you may lack the words that you need, but when you find a card, having searched through a couple and said, no, that's not how I feel. No, that's not. When you find that card, it's as if the person who wrote it felt you. Like, yeah, this card is me. This expresses exactly how I feel. And that's the power of the lament here in this particular text. It offers our souls ways of saying what it really needs to feel. Now, I want to lay down two markers here for us as we think about the text, and we're going to read parts of chapter 1, kind of see what's in there for us. But there's an all too common problem in life, and it's the issue of unresolved grief, unresolved loss, how we fail to reconcile parts of our lives that are heavy and that are weighty. Let me say this. Not because you fail to do your grief work means that the work of grief is going to go away. Right? You can't deny grief forever. You may postpone the work indefinitely, but rest assured that work will visit you. Right? At some point, you might think that you won't ever have to deal with it, and the issue is past, and it's been 4 months, 8 months, it's been a year, and that the saying, time heals all wounds, that's only partially true if you do the work. Because time that lapses in life without the necessary soul work will only complicate it when you have to address it. Right? When you stave something off, you say, "Hey, I don't have time. I don't have time for it now." At some point, it's going to catch up with you. And not just catch up with you, it's going to overwhelm you. Yes. Right? Just like you can't deny the body rest without it resting you, you can't dismiss grief and think that it won't visit you. So just as the body, on the slide says, just as the body heals if certain conditions are met, so will the mind heal. Yeah. So this is healing of soul, not just of body, healing of soul, of your very being. And the healing of soul requires some things, just like the healing of body requires some things. So if you're dealing with an issue of body, you got to realize if you get cut and you have a wound, you got to do some things. One, you got to clean the wound, and you have to remove any foreign material from the wound. That if you leave something that is foreign to the wound, you run the risk of infection. I remember an episode of trauma, life in the ER, that recounted a trauma surgeon who is treating a man who had his arm mangled in a machine. So he's brought into the trauma center, and he's a machinist, and somehow in some accident, some industrial accident, he's got his arm just badly mangled. And the trauma surgeon looks at the man's arm and realizes that he can't salvage the arm. It's too badly mangled. And he says, because he can't salvage it, he can't repair it, it can't be treated, he has to amputate. But he says he has to determine the right point of amputation, because if he leaves any non-viable flesh, it would compromise the flesh that is healthy and viable. Right? That in the wounds of body, you have to take what is not viable out, so that what is viable is given a chance to live. If you don't do it, you run the risk of some contamination, of some infection, of sepsis, something. And it's like that in our souls. When you don't work out in you what is grieving your soul, what is injurious, what offends, you run the risk essentially of contaminating your life. Your spiritual outlook can be affected. So you got to remove what's foreign. You got to clean the wound, keep it clean. You also have to bring the edges of the wound together in order for it to heal. And you have to give your body the proper nutrients that it needs in order for healing to be sustained. So in the realm of your own psyche, in the realm of your soul, right? In the realm of pastoral care, and that's what pastoral care really is. It's the care of people's soul, the psyche, right? The ontology, the being, the completion of who you are. Not just your physicality, but your emotional state, your spiritual state, right? That in the process of coping, coping with the issues of emotions and the psyche, that process of coping it is called grief work. That's what we do. So in the work of the psyche, in order to heal, you have to remove the unnecessary contaminants. You have to deal with those issues, whether it's guilt, resentment, some regret, some emotional impediment that keeps you from being able to talk about the issue in a way that's meaningful and healthy. I mean, because if you can't name the issue and squarely put it on the table, it still has a hold on you. If 2 years later you still can't talk about it, the trauma still has a grip on you. And time alone won't ever give you the gain of perspective unless you do the work that you need to do, right? You got to actually work through those contaminants. You also ought to keep yourself from being isolated. This is important because there are so many people who say, I need some time to myself. And you do need some time to yourself, but it can't be all the time that you take, right? You can't take all the time that just to yourself, because what will happen is you'll start the narrative, woe is me, nobody knows the trouble I see. That's the spiritual, and you start to think like you're alone. Nobody cares. Nobody feels me. Nobody understands. And as long as you dwell in that place and that darkness alone, isolation and alienation sets in. You remember the prophet Elijah, after, this experience on Mount Carmel and the prophets of Baal being defeated and God initiating revival, he is driven to the cave after the words of the queen that comes to him, like, I'm going to take your life. And he's saying, God, look, I'm alone. Ends up under a juniper tree, ends up in a cave, because that's what grief does to us. It drives us to a place where we have to get alone and think that we are alone. And even if you can't see anyone around you in the place where you are, you at least ought to look up, right? Because you're not alone. You're not alone, right? You can't take it by yourself. So work through those contaminants. Try to stay connected with some grounded people. Yeah, some grounded people. Now this is important because everyone can't do grief work with you, right? And can I really help you? I know that this is the medium we're using, right, to get the message out, but social media ain't necessarily the best place to do your grief work. Yeah. I mean, just trying to get a bunch of opinions and people who it's not always the best place. Sometimes you need God, listen, plus a therapist. Yeah. Can I say that? Right? You need God plus a counselor, plus someone who will care with you and for you through your particular needs. And then you also need the psychological nutrients. You need to be reinforced in positivity, in optimism, in hopefulness, in order to heal from the things you're experiencing. Now, can I go to the next slide. Let me go to the next slide. Let me see. All right. Here it is. All right. Now, in the book of Lamentations, you will hear, and I use that word intentionally, I use that verb intentionally, you will hear four primary voices that seem to want to testify. You'll hear the voice of a poet. You'll hear the voice of Judah, or personified Zion. You will hear the unnamed man. You will hear the collective voice. Right? The poet is speaking in the form of a funeral dirge. Right? This is the funeral, the death liturgy. And he's bewailing what happened to the city. Okay? So he's taking in view the historical event. The personified Zion is the voice of daughter Zion that you get also in the passage, or the widow who has lost husband and children. Of course, right? The loss of husband, i.e. God, is not through death, but seems to be through some separation, some alienation, some estrangement. And that's the voice that's crying out. So if you remember on Sunday, as Reverends Landry and Jones read from Lamentations 1, the verses that Reverend Landry read were personified Zion's voice, the voice of the feminine crying, voicing the concern on behalf of her people. And if you go to Lamentations 1, let's go to Lamentations 1. I want you to hear the voice of the sister who is crying, who cries out in verse 9. O Lord, behold my affliction, for the enemy is exalted. Right? That's a voice in verse 9, crying out. In verse 11 of verse 12, verse 11, listen to her cry out. See, O Lord, and consider, for I am scorned. Is it nothing to you, any sorrow like my sorrow? Is anyone else's lot like mine? And the Lord has inflicted this on me. Verse 13, from above he has sent fire into my bones, and it overpowered them. He has spread a net for my feet and turned me back. He has made me desolate and faint all the day. Verse 14, the yoke of my transgressions was bound. They were woven together by his hands and thrust on my neck. He made my strength fail. The Lord delivered me into the hands of those whom I am not able to withstand. Not out of their hands, into their hands. Now, underline that, because I want to take that up in chapter 2 when we're really thinking about what is God's role in this experience. Yeah, and how we understand how that plays out in this. The Lord has trampled underfoot all my mighty men in my midst. He has called an assembly against me to crush my young men. The Lord trampled as in a winepress the virgin daughter of Judah. Verse 16, for these things I weep, my eye overflows with water, because the comforter who should restore my life is far from me. My children are desolate because the enemy prevailed. Then the poet picks up in verse 17. Judah personified in the feminine picks up again in verse 18. The Lord is righteous, for I rebelled against his commandment. Hear now, all peoples, and behold my sorrow. My virgins and my young men have gone into captivity. I called for my lovers, but they deceived me. My priests and my elders breathed their last in the city, while they sought food to restore their life. See, O Lord, I am in distress. My soul is troubled. My heart is overturned within me, for I have been very rebellious. Outside, the sword bereaves. At home, it is like death. They have heard that I sigh, but no one comforts me. All my enemies have heard of my trouble. They are glad that you have done it. Bring on the day you have announced, that they may become like me. Misery wants company here, y'all. Let all their wickedness come before you, and do to them as you have done to me. For all of my transgressions, for my sighs are many, and my heart is faint. Right? She's articulating exactly what she feels. It's weighty. It's heavy. She has been alienated and has to get through the crisis. Here are the issues that she's raising in this chapter. The fact that she, who was supposed to be the pride of his eye, right? The inhabitant of this city that's supposed to not be penetrated, is now subject to conquerors, right? You've done this. You've put me over into their hands. You've delivered me into their hands. And then all of her lovers, as she would say, former allies, none of them have comfort for her. None of them are responding to her with any compassion, with any care, with any concern. As a matter of fact, they seem to be looking on her situation with amusement. I think that there's a term in German, the pronunciation might be off, called Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is this term in German that means the amusement or the pleasure that one derives from the pain of someone else, right? That there's pleasure that one gains from watching another suffer and struggle. Now, I know it sounds crazy, but it's real. Some people are taking delight in your calamity, in your suffering. For them, it brings them joy, like Anita Baker would say, right? It brings them joy, right? It gives them joy. But it's no excuse for you not to simply articulate what you feel, right? She's talking about the leaders, the priests who have breathed their last as they are going out looking for food. The population has been decimated. Those who have not been deported have been killed. Those who have not died are in despair. They're dreading, the going down of the sun because they don't know where any resource or supply will come from. The temple has been profaned. The festivals that used to come, because the poet writes this line in the chapter about the very roads to Jerusalem are mourning now. The very roads. Can you imagine that imagery? The very pathway that the pilgrims would take is a trail of tears. And the supplies of food and substance and sustenance are all scarce. And you'll see in chapter 2, when it's read on Sunday in the liturgy, how when life when life throws you in these precarious positions, you will do things, or at least be tempted to do things you never would have imagined considering at all. My, right? Which is why you ought not be so harsh and so quick in passing judgment on other people when you don't live their reality, when you don't walk in their shoes. You have to, because the judgment that you bring on someone else, it's going to turn back on you. Now, I heard this last night. Someone shared this clip of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And don't get all squirmish, Christians. I mean, wisdom and truth can be derived from many traditions. He was sharing. It was in his younger days, but he was talking about whenever you see someone fall, don't laugh. Learn, he says. He says, whenever you see someone through some mistake become a public disgrace, white or black, rich or poor, male or female, he says, don't laugh. He says, learn. Because in laughing, you're only setting yourself up to repeat the mistake and to join in a list of people who, like the one you have scoffed at, like the one you have mocked, at some point you will fall by a similar trap and will add your name to a list of those who have been exposed. So we have this sense that she is crying out based upon her plight, based upon what she's going through, and she is articulating what she needs in order to continue to survive through what she's going through. So the next slide. What are some of the plights we are experiencing in the days in which we live? So we've noticed how this pandemic was able to do what nothing else has been able to do. Shut everything down. I mean, shut everything down. Right? The marketplace, sporting events, the airline industry. I listened the other day, and they projected that in the month of May, they will have less flights in the entire month of May, less passengers and travelers in the month of May than they have had on one single day in the month of May last year. Yeah. Shut everything down. The global economy, physical distancing and isolation. Like, I don't use the term social distancing because, words matter. Physical distancing. Socially, we're still connected, right? Disproportionate sickness and death in black communities. Now, this is a moral matter for America, y'all, because we've been telling America we ain't had a level playing field ever in the nation. We've been saying it a long time. And COVID-19 exposes that. That if black folks are, I think I understand, 27% of the population of the state of Alabama. If you're 27%, then why is the representation somewhere in the 40%? Why is it in the 40 percentile? If it's 20, shouldn't the sickness and the death be proportionate to the percentile of representation in the population? Then why is it different? We've seen now exposed issues of comorbidity, issues of the lack of access to health care resources, and let's tell the truth, y'all, the suspicion that we may have of the healthcare establishment, the Tuskegee experiment, right? Those things are still ingrained in the psyche of folks who are experiencing this issue and who are struggling. Plus, as James Baldwin used to put it, look, if you're going to be a relatively conscious black person in America, you're going to be in a rage almost all the time. Because that's what it is. It's just baked in the social infrastructure. And then, to make matters worse, there's governmental indifference, right? I mean, you got the president talking about winding down the coronavirus task force, as if they ever got really ramped up, as if they were really ever aggressive in creating what we need in order to respond to the crisis, as if they ever took the issues of black and brown people seriously in trying to mobilize protective measures in order to keep the citizenry safe. But the pivot toward the economy is a pivot for personal gain, for political fortunes, at the expense of people who've died. Didn't he say it'll magically disappear? You know, the death, and anytime you speaking of scores of thousands of people dying without some gravity, with some gravitas, with some weightiness, it sickens me how willing we are to just let, now the latest projections will be somewhere around 134,000 people die, and it's good. It's on the low end. And here's why it's okay. Because this dog-eat-dog culture that we have cultivated suggests survival of the fittest. If you have to die in order for me to survive, it's okay. But that's what we are called to lament. That's what we are called to grieve. That's what we are called not to gloss over. Not just to get to a praise party, an experience of celebration, but to acknowledge this can't be right. God can't be pleased with this. Just for us to get some more gains in the Dow Jones of the stock market. That really, God can't be pleased with it. Right? That's what lamentation does. It acknowledges that this world is not the world that God intends, that we still have work to do. It has not yet become the kingdom of our God in Christ. Right? Here's the next slide. So, that's the national mood. Then we have individual griefs. And here are some, but you may have others, right? And I want you to put what those griefs are in the comments section. I want you to articulate them if you're courageous enough, because can I tell you something? It takes courage to articulate grief. All right? Silence is a killer, y'all. Silence is a killer. Because in silence, you dwell with it alone, and you don't get a way to articulate it. But when you name it, you at least know what you're dealing with, right? And so some are dealing with the death of loved ones. Some have died from COVID-19. Some have died during the pandemic, and you could not go to look upon the fallen frame of your loved one. That's a grief. That's a real issue. You couldn't do what we do when we have funerary rites. Hug on each other, love on each other, hold hands, wipe tears, hear songs of comfort, hear the liturgy of the resurrection. to be gathered in the church as was the fashion of the one who died, to give them the right of a church funeral, right? But having to go to a truncated liturgy at the graveside, right? That's real grief. And that's going to factor in how we deal with the work that our soul needs. Some are grieving the loss of a marriage. You're wearing the ring, but the marriage has been dead and over. That's grief. And you're wearing it because you don't want to have to answer those questions. What happened? It's real grief. The end of a relationship. The pledge of love and loyalty that did not last to the point of death, parting those who came together. That's real. In these days, we know that now almost 30 million Americans have filed for unemployment benefits. The loss of income, the loss of a job. Not that you put your entire stock in that position, but it did give you meaning. It provided revenue. It provided some purpose, that you got up in the day, you faced the day, you did what you loved doing, and now you're struggling with it. The missed opportunities and celebrations that won't occur. We're in graduation season where you worked hard and you can't don your cap and gown. You can't go and celebrate with your friends with whom you used to have late night study sessions. You know, folks you used to have classes with. You can't say that farewell, that goodbye, or let's keep in touch like you would have. That's grief, y'all. Just the lack of human contact. You can't be together like you used to. You know how black folks are. We're expressive people. You know, you get together, you play spades, you play dominoes, you fire up the grill, we gather around, and it will be a party, and no one even planned it. You can't do that like that. Memorial Day is coming up, right? We're not going to celebrate it like we usually celebrate it. All those things, right? These are things that we grieve. That affect us. And it's important when you're dealing with those issues that you're honest, that you're real, and that sometimes you're wrong. I see Erica says grieving, not going to church. Yes. I mean, a lot has been shared about the church not being a building. Yes, that's true. But this building is a place of significance for the people who call this home. Funerals here, weddings here, dedications here, confessions of faith here, baptisms here. You've cried here. You've praised here. You've given a solemn vow to God here. Yes, these are real, natural griefs that we bear, right? Dr. Cote is here. I want to hear that song, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. I think we want to close on that. But these are real things that we are experiencing that are a part of our thing. But here's what Lamentation teaches us as we close in these last 4 to 5 minutes. It teaches us that grief is normal and healthy. Don't be afraid to cry. That goes against all that the culture will teach you. Never let them see you cry. Yeah. Look, at some point, even the strongest among us face and reach our breaking points. Grief, shedding tears, that's a work of grief. It's natural. It's real. It's real. Also, shock and disbelief do set in, because never would you have thought this could happen, that we could be out of church this long. Things that you used to take for granted, being able to go and visit loved ones and just get in your car and drive and travel. You never thought that those things would be curtailed, that there would be some limitation on them, and yet they are. So shock and disbelief do set in. But then I also want you to realize that it takes courage, y'all, to talk about the weighty stuff. It takes courage to talk about grief. It takes courage to name what happened to you. And when you name what happened to you, you are starting to take agency back. When you name it and you say, this happened, but this should not have happened. Now, I want you to hear this, because there are a lot of people who want to simply assign it to some permissive will of God. But the wisdom of Howard Thurman teaches us that he was courageous enough to say that not everything that happens in life reflects the purpose of God for life. Some things that happen should not have happened and caused God grief and God pain. And so don't think that just because it happened means God is supposed to make something good come out of, or God intended it for. No, some things were just bad things that never should have happened. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't create a response. You can't respond in a way that's faithful, but you at least need to assign that was messed up. Yeah, right? Then also, we learn in Lamentations that sometimes God does not speak back. Yeah. Sometimes God does not speak back. And what do you do when God seems silent, right? What do you do when God seems silent? Finally, as I prepare to bid you good day, here's some wisdom from Zora Neale Hurston. And this is important. This is why you shouldn't shut up when people want you to shut up. She says, if you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. If you're silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. I remember when I was in my residency for clinical pastoral education, we had a retreat of our residents, and we went away to a retreat center, and we were sharing in our conversation about some experiences that we had. And this was about a little over a year after my brother was murdered, that I shared on Sunday in the sermon. And I was sharing with that because, I was putting so much stock in trying to be a good minister that I failed to be the grieving brother, acknowledging the depth of that pain and what it meant. And I remember a colleague said to me, and I guess she was trying to be helpful, but she said to me, when are you going to let it go? And I recalled something stirring in me that wanted to respond to her in a very sharp tone. And I let some time pass, because sometimes that's what you need to do. Don't respond in the moment, let some time pass. And I had another occasion to come to her and to respond and to say to her how much that comment affected me, and not in a good way. Because my response to her was, it won't take me a lifetime, but I do have some time to deal with it. And that's the reality. We have time to deal with it, but you have to deal with it so that it is not prolonged and cause you to put things on hold. So as the wisdom of of this classical writer. Don't be silent, or you'll die alone, and they'll say it was a good death. I want to pray for the members of our church family who are experiencing challenges of life. Sister Joyce Arterberry, her uncle passed away. Brother Cedric Harris, his father has died, who is also Edna Fail's brother-in-law. We're praying for you all. Praying for Deacon Huey Thompson, the death of a sister-in-law. Praying for Sister Odell Booker in hospital, Brother Dennis Smith, who had surgery, Sister Shirley Wyckoff, who is at home, thanks be to God, and others of our church family. So we're praying for you during these days. And then today is nurses recognition. We have some names of nurses. I'm sure these are not all the nurses, but I want to shout out Sister Rosalind Richardson, Phyllis McMillan, Tanya Thompson, Ronki Aluowe, Elizabeth Scrivens, Manetta Williams, Stacy Langford, Doris Stewart, Juanita Townsend, Rosalind Jett, Marsha Hughes. Is it Marsh or Marsha Hughes? Mary Vickers, Sandra Pearson, Rita Finch, Jordan Henderson. We shout you out today. And then it's Teachers Recognition Week. And we have a bunch of teachers, a lot of teachers. So we want to shout out the teachers of the JRS-CDCA. Thank you for your work. Thank you for adapting during these times and still delivering on quality service and education to our children. Thank you, educators, for what you do in these moments. I think I'm at the end of my time. I'm over my time. I'm sorry about it. We miss you dearly. We want to see you soon, but we're planning on what that would look like in the weeks and months to come. So please stay tuned. Graduates, send us your information. We want to celebrate you and be in touch. Thank you, deacons, for calling. Thank you, lay ministers, for calling. Thank you all who do what you do to make what we must do here possible. God's blessings upon you. Come on, Dr. Cote, give us some going out music.
What a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs